On March 3, 1925, the Paris newspaper Gil Blas announced that the Eiffel Tower had been sold to an American millionaire. The deal was done in secret just days before, and would see the iconic landmark dismantled and shipped across the Atlantic for its new owner, Victor Lustig, an Austrian-born forger and con artist. This was the latest in a long line of successful cons, and when it came to getting away with his crimes, he was almost always one step ahead of the law. But how did he manage to pull off such a daring feat? And more importantly, where is the Eiffel Tower now? Victor Lustig first came to prominence in the US during the 19th, when he posed as a wealthy baron from Hungary looking to invest his fortune in American stocks. With the market booming, it wasn't hard for Lustig to convince investors that they should let him handle their portfolios, and after charging commissions on trades that never took place, he made off with over $2 million, which adjusted for inflation is well over $27 million. He spent some time behind bars after being caught, but served only 3 years of a 20-year sentence. When he was released in 1924, Lustig fled to France, where he began planning his next big scam. At the time, France was struggling financially following World War I, and the government was open to selling some of their assets to help bolster the economy. Lustig learned that Gustave Eiffel, the engineer behind the tower that bears his name, was owed a large sum of money by the government. So he hatched a plan to buy the debt and then threaten Eiffel into selling the tower to him. Lustig tracked down Gustave Eiffel and introduced himself as a close friend of the Austrian ambassador, along with claiming to be the nephew of a wealthy banker who was interested in investing in France. As part of his ruse, he even gave Eiffel a forged letter from his supposed uncle, along with a photograph of him with other high-ranking European nobility. Though clearly a brazen move, it worked like a charm, and Eiffel agreed to sell the tower to Lustig for 1 million francs, or around $40,000 at the time. But after receiving the payment, he handed over a set of false title deeds and pocketed the cash. When Eiffel realized the next day that he hadn't actually sold the tower and that the buyer was wanted for fraud in America, he reported the incident to the police. By this point, however, Lustig was already on his way out of town, and despite being put on trial in absentia and sentenced to 4 years in prison, he managed to avoid capture. Undeterred, authorities once again tried to recoup the money from Eiffel, and so they offered him the chance to purchase the tower back. He agreed, and with the government now owing him around 800,000 francs, he allowed them to pay him off by taking down the tower. It was then reassembled on its original site and remains there to this day. With his latest scheme coming to an end, Lustig retreated to Austria, where he attempted to lay low for a while. But in 1935, he was arrested for forging U.S. currency and sent to Sing Sing prison in New York. While incarcerated, he was interviewed by journalist John Roy Carlson, who wrote a story about Lustig for the Saturday Evening Post. In the article, Lustig boasted that he could make a lot of money selling the Eiffel Tower to Americans. According to Lustig, all he needed was someone to front him the money to transport it, and he knew just the guy in that regard. As far as we can tell, this was the first time that Lustig actually entertained the idea of moving the tower to the United States. We know this because in the late 1930s, he repeated the same story to fellow inmate and future mob boss, Michael Francis. However, according to Francis, Lustig claimed that the real reason why the tower couldn't be sold was because the French government wouldn't allow it. In a twist of irony, Lustig apparently considered this to be a positive thing, as he didn't want to spend the rest of his life in prison for the crime. After being released in 1940, Lustig spent much of World War II evading the Nazis and later served as a U.S. Army interpreter. During the war in Europe, following his service, he returned to the U.S. and carried on scamming people until his death in 1952. Meanwhile, the Eiffel Tower continued to stand proudly in Paris and become one of the most visited monuments in the world, with over 6 million visitors every year. It's safe to say that very few people will ever learn about the man who tried to take it down. Now you might be wondering if it would even be possible to disassemble and ship the Eiffel Tower. Well, fortunately for us, Victor Lustig never attempted to do this, so we'll never know. However, in 1968, the mayor of Quebec, Canada, proposed doing exactly this. His plan involved dismantling the tower and rebuilding it in the Canadian city. Though it sounds crazy, the idea wasn't totally unrealistic. You see, at the time, there were several companies that specialized in transporting large structures, and several others had already expressed interest in buying the Eiffel Tower. However, France refused to budge on their decision not to sell. Undeterred, the mayor of Quebec went ahead and ordered 70 freight cars and enough flatbed trucks to transport 100,000 pieces of the tower. But when his order arrived, it soon became apparent that there was no way he'd ever get the tower from Paris to Quebec. You see, in addition to the fact that the French wouldn't sell it, the train cars and trucks weren't nearly large enough to fit the thousands of pieces needed to rebuild it. Realizing that the mayor canceled the order and scrapped his plans. And thankfully, the Eiffel Tower remained right where it belonged. Throughout his life, Victor Lustig pulled off many daring scams, but selling the Eiffel Tower twice was by far his greatest accomplishment. Thanks for watching.